Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Phantom Ship. It was a moonless night on the Isle of Wight, the sea as dark as the depths of an ancient curse. Holly Arnold stood on the cliffside, the salty wind whipping her hair. The rhythmic crash of waves against jagged rocks below felt like a heartbeat, ominous and steady. She stared out at the horizon, where a strange fog had begun to swirl. It was the kind of fog that didn't seem natural, thick and shining like something alive. "Do you see it?" a voice asked behind her. It was James, her childhood friend, who had joined her on this late-night walk to the cliffs. He pointed out over the water. Holly squinted, her heart skipping a beat as she caught sight of something that hadn't been there a moment ago. A ship. It loomed in the mist, its tall, rotting mast piercing the dark sky, its tattered sails flapping weakly. There was no sound of engines, no modern lights, only an eerie glow emanating from the ship itself, casting long shadows on the water. It looked like it had drifted from another time, a vessel lost to history. The stories her grandmother used to tell her as a child rushed back into her mind. The Phantom Ship. Holly had heard about the cursed vessel all her life, passed down from island lore. It was said to appear only once every generation, a ghost ship that claimed the souls of those foolish enough to board it. Those who disappeared on its decks were never seen again, not even their bones. "I didn't think it was real," Holly whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. James shrugged nervously. "Neither did I, but there is." The two stood in silence, watching the ghostly ship drift closer to the shore. It was almost mesmerizing, its glow enchanting in a strange way. But there was something wrong about it, something that made Holly's skin crawl. She couldn't shake the feeling that it had been waiting for her. Holly turned to leave, but something in her gut twisted, pulling her back. The ship, she thought. "It's calling me." Without a word to James, she stepped closer to the cliff's edge, feeling a cold shiver race up her spine. She could hear a distant sound, now an eerie, hollow moan carried by the wind, like the voices of the dead whispering in a language long forgotten. "Holly, what are you doing?" James called out, concern creeping into his voice. But Holly couldn't answer. She was moving almost in a trance, drawn to the ship. Her feet navigated the narrow path down to the beach, and before she knew it, she was standing on the rocky shore, gazing up at the massive ghost ship that now loomed in the bay. Its hull was blackened with age, barnacles clinging to the wood like parasites. The stench of rot and salt water filled the air. A faint, flickering light appeared on the deck of the ship, and the plank slowly lowered itself, creaking as it touched the shore. It was an invitation. James caught up to her, grabbing her arm. "We need to leave now," but Holly didn't move. "I have to know," she said, her voice distant, like it wasn't her own. "Know what?" he asked, exasperated. "I have to know what's on that ship. I've heard about it my entire life. It feels like it's been calling me." James hesitated, glancing at the ship with fear in his eyes. "Holly, this is madness. We don't know what's up there. People disappear. Remember, I won't disappear," Holly whispered, shaking off his hand. "Not if I understand it, not if I face it." Before James could stop her, she walked up the plank and stepped onto the deck of the Phantom Ship. The wood groaned beneath her feet, the air instantly colder, as though she had stepped into another realm. The eerie glow seemed brighter now, illuminating the ship in an unnatural light. James hesitated for a moment, then followed her, not willing to leave her alone. As they stood on the deck, the fog thickened around them, swallowing the shore from view. Holly looked around. The ship was in worse condition than it had appeared from the cliffs. Ropes hung like nooses, sails tattered beyond repair, and the deck was slick with some kind of dark, oily substance. "Hello?" Holly called, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to sound brave. Her voice echoed through the empty ship. For a moment there was silence. Then came the sound of footsteps. Holly turned quickly, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving across the deck as if someone was walking in the shadows just out of sight. Holly's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She felt James grab her arm again. "We need to get off this thing," he said, his voice low and urgent. Now, but before they could move, a figure stepped out from the mist. It was a man, or at least it had once been a man. His skin was pale, almost translucent, his eyes sunken and hollow. His clothes were soaked and torn, clinging to his skeletal frame. He looked like he had been drowned centuries ago, his lips twisted into a grimace of eternal suffering. "Welcome aboard," the figure rasped, his voice like the scraping of stones. Holly backed away, fear gripping her. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, its empty eyes fixed on her. "I am the last of the living crew," he said slowly. "The captain of the Phantom ship, and now you are part of my crew." Before Holly could react, a cold, bony hand shot out from the mist, grabbing her arms and legs. She screamed, trying to fight them off, but they were too strong. James shouted, trying to pull her free, but he, too, was seized by the ghostly crew. The hands dragged them across the deck, toward the bowels of the ship. "No, let me go!" Holly screamed, her voice echoing into the void. They were pulled below deck into a dark, suffocating space that smelled of decay and death. Holly's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw the others, the souls who had boarded the Phantom ship before her. They were trapped here, their bodies twisted and broken, their eyes wide with terror. She realized then that they were not truly dead. They were trapped, forever alive in the agony of the ship, cursed to sail the seas for eternity, never able to escape. And now she was one of them. The last thing Holly saw before the darkness swallowed her was the captain's cold, dead smile. In the days that followed, the Phantom ship disappeared once again into the mist. The people of the Isle of Wight whispered about the disappearance of Holly Arnold and James, two more souls claimed by the cursed vessel. And somewhere, far out at sea, the ship sailed on, its ghostly crew waiting for the next unfortunate soul to heed its call. Years passed, but Holly Arnold's disappearance remained one of the Isle of Wight's most whispered legends. Occasionally, the island's fishermen claimed to see the Phantom ship drifting in the distance, its eerie glow flickering on the horizon before vanishing without a trace. But no one dared approach it. The stories were enough to keep them away, the whispers of souls trapped aboard, never to return. But deep within the belly of the Phantom ship, time had lost its meaning. Holly had become part of the ship's cursed existence, though she refused to accept it. She wandered the rotting decks, her heart still beating, though every moment felt like an eternity. The ship creaked with each sway of the ocean, the morning wind whispering in her ears, and yet, no matter how far she walked, there was no escape. Below deck, her fellow prisoner souls who had once been as alive as she was suffered silently in their wretched fates. But Holly refused to succumb to despair. She wasn't like the others, who had given in to the curse, letting it hollow them out. She still had fire inside her, a spark of determination that hadn't been extinguished by the cold, grasping hands of the ship's ghostly crew. And every night she dreamed of the cliffs, of the sea crashing against the shore, of escape. James had been different. From the moment the hands had seized him, he had struggled, fought, and screamed until his voice gave out. And then, like so many before him, the ship took and broke his spirit. Now he wandered the deck alongside the other lost souls, his eyes vacant, his face expressionless. Holly had tried to reach him, to shake him from whatever nightmare had claimed him, but he was gone in every way that mattered. Holly often sat in the ship's crow's nest, where she could see the endless horizon. The Phantom ship sailed without direction, guided by forces she could not comprehend. Some nights the fog cleared just enough to reveal distant land. She would feel hope stir within her, only for it to fade as the ship veered back into the mist. But tonight was different. The fog was thinner than usual, the air cooler and crisper, and Holly sensed a shift. Something had changed in the ship's rhythm, as if the curse itself was weakening. She climbed down from the crow's nest and made her way across the deck, her footsteps light and cautious. The other souls shuffled aimlessly, their eyes dull, their movements mechanical. The captain, an apparition of death itself, stood at the helm, staring straight ahead, unmoving. Holly's eyes darted to the lifeboats. There were only two left, both old and covered in barnacles, their ropes frayed. She had tried before to escape this way, but every time the ocean itself seemed to rise against her, waves crashing the boats apart before she could even get away. Still, tonight felt different. As she reached the lifeboat, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. Startled, Holly spun around to face James. His face, still drained of life, was twisted in a strange expression, a mixture of confusion and recognition. "Holly," he whispered, his voice hoarse as though he hadn't spoken in years. "What are you doing?" "I have to try, James," Holly said, keeping her voice low. "I can't stay here. There has to be a way out of this. There has to be something beyond this ship." He shook his head, his eyes wild with fear. "There's no way out. The ship, it won't let you go. You'll only die trying." "Maybe," she replied, her resolve hardening. "But I'd rather die trying than stay here forever." James gripped her arm tighter, desperation in his voice. "Please don't. I've seen what happens when people try. The sea, it's alive, Holly. It's part of the curse that swallows you whole." Holly pulled her arm free, her eyes blazing with determination. "I have to believe there's something more. I refuse to let this ship win." James stepped back, his face a mask of sorrow. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words never came. A sound echoed from behind them, a deep, groaning creak of wood, and Holly's heart leapt into her throat. The captain was moving. His hollow eyes had shifted, locking onto her with a gaze colder than death itself. The ghostly crew stood around him, their heads turning in unison as if controlled by a single, malevolent force. Holly's blood ran cold as the captain raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at her. "She cannot leave," he rasped, his voice like the wail of a distant storm. The crew began to close in, their dead faces emotionless, their movements slow but deliberate. Holly's pulse quickened as panic surged through her veins. She knew what came next, she had seen it before. The crew would drag her down below deck, where the darkness was absolute, where the souls of the down lay in wait, twisted and broken by the curse. But not tonight. Holly turned and ran for the lifeboat, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands trembled as she frantically untied the rope, glancing over her shoulder to see the crew gaining on her. The lifeboat hit the water with a loud splash, and Holly leapt in, grabbing the oars and rowing with all her strength. The sea around her churned violently, waves rising higher and higher, as if the ocean itself sought to drag her back to the cursed ship. But Holly kept rowing, her muscles burning, her lungs aching for breath. The phantom ship grew smaller behind her, its eerie glow fading into the distance. For a brief, glorious moment, Holly thought she had done it. She had escaped. Then the water beneath her boat began to shift, swirling into a whirlpool. The oars were torn from her hands as the lifeboat spun wildly. The sky above darkened, and a deep, unnatural voice echoed across the waves. "You cannot escape." The whirlpool pulled her down, and the last thing Holly saw before the water swallowed her was the phantom ship, its ghostly crew watching from the deck, their empty eyes fixed on her. Holly awoke to the sound of waves gently lapping against the shore. She blinked against the blinding light of the sun and slowly sat up, her body sore and cold. She was on a beach, the cliffs of the Isle of Wight rising in the distance. The familiar sight of her home should have filled her with relief, but instead a sense of dread gnawed at her. She stood looking out at the sea. The phantom ship was nowhere to be seen, but she knew it was still out there, drifting in the mist. Waiting. Watching. As Holly took a step toward the cliffs, a chilling realization settled over her like a shroud. She had escaped the ship's grasp, but she was not free. The curse had followed her. She could feel it in the air, in the way the shadows seemed to stretch toward her. The phantom ship had claimed her soul, and it was only a matter of time before it called her back. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.